Have you ever wondered how trauma could possibly lead to narcissism? An intriguing question, isn't it? Today, we're diving into the complex world of human psychology to unravel this unique correlation. Understanding this connection is not just significant for personal growth, but it also fosters empathy towards those around us who may be battling their inner demons. We're about to embark on a journey that will shed light on the intricate workings of the human mind. In the next few minutes, we'll explore the psychological mechanisms linking trauma and narcissism. Trauma can leave deep-seated scars affecting individuals in ways we may not fully comprehend. To grasp the concept of trauma, let's start from its basic definition. Trauma is a response to a distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causing feelings of helplessness, diminishing their sense of self and their ability to feel a full range of emotions and experiences. Trauma is like a psychological wound that lingers long after the physical damage is healed. It can affect our thoughts, emotions, and indeed our very perception of the world around us. It's not just something that happens to us, it's something that happens within us. Now, trauma comes in different forms, each with its unique impact on the individual. Acute trauma results from a single distressing event, while chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. There's also complex trauma, which is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often invasive and interpersonal in nature. The effects of trauma can be equally diverse. It can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, depression, anxiety, and a multitude of other mental health conditions. But trauma doesn't always manifest in these diagnosable conditions. Sometimes it presents itself in the subtleties of our behavior, in the way we interact with others, our relationships, and how we perceive ourselves. Here's where it gets even more intricate. Our brains, especially during our formative years, are incredibly malleable. They're shaped by the experiences we encounter. Trauma, particularly when experienced during these crucial years, can significantly affect our brain development, shaping our responses to stress, our ability to regulate emotions, and our overall mental health. Understanding trauma helps us empathize with those who've been through these experiences. It allows us to see the human behind the behavior, the person beneath the pain. It's a crucial first step in breaking the cycle of trauma, providing effective support and fostering healing. Now that we have a basic understanding of trauma, let's delve into narcissism. Narcissism, often misunderstood, is more than just excessive self-love or vanity. It's a complex psychological construct, a personality trait that can manifest in various degrees, from the benign to the pathological. At its core, narcissism revolves around an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. A narcissist views themselves as superior, entitled to special treatment, and expects others to comply with their desires without question. They are often preoccupied with fantasies about success, power, and brilliance, and they tend to exaggerate their achievements and talents. Yet beneath this grandiose exterior, they are extremely sensitive to criticism, and often harbor feelings of insecurity and inadequacy. But it's crucial to distinguish between healthy self-esteem and narcissism. Healthy self-esteem involves a balanced, realistic view of oneself. It's acknowledging your strengths and accepting your weaknesses. It's about being confident, but not at the expense of others. Narcissism, on the other hand, is a distorted self-image. It's an insatiable need for validation and admiration from others to maintain a fragile sense of self-worth. It's an extreme focus on oneself, often to the point of disregarding the feelings and needs of others. It's important to note, however, that not all who display these characteristics are narcissists. We all have narcissistic traits to some degree. It's a spectrum, and it's only when these traits become excessive and interfere with a person's daily life and relationships that it evolves into a disorder. As we delve deeper into this topic, it's also critical to remember that narcissism is not a choice. It's a product of various factors, including genetics, upbringing, and yes, trauma. The link between trauma and narcissism is complex and multifaceted, a topic we'll be delving into in our next segment. With a clear understanding of both trauma and narcissism, we can now explore their connection. The link between trauma and narcissism isn't immediately obvious, but it's an important one to uncover. Let's delve into this fascinating yet complex relationship. Trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that can leave a lasting impact on an individual's psyche. It can stem from various sources such as violence, neglect, or even emotional abuse. On the other hand, narcissism, in its most basic form, involves an inflated sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy for others. So, how do these two seemingly distinct concepts intertwine? The answer lies in the defense mechanisms that trauma survivors might develop. When a person experiences a traumatic event, their mind may resort to certain coping strategies to shield themselves from the distressing emotions associated with that experience. These mechanisms may include denial, repression, or projection. For instance, denial involves refusing to acknowledge the traumatic event, while repression involves unconsciously pushing the painful memories out of conscious awareness. Projection, on the other hand, involves attributing one's own unacceptable thoughts or feelings onto others. Now you may wonder, how do these defense mechanisms relate to narcissism? Well, it's quite fascinating. Narcissistic traits such as a grandiose sense of self, lack of empathy, and a constant need for admiration can actually be seen as an extension of these defense mechanisms. For example, a grandiose sense of self can be a form of denial, where the individual refuses to acknowledge their vulnerabilities. Lack of empathy can be a form of repression, where the individual disconnects from their own emotions to such an extent that they also disconnect from the emotions of others. The constant need for admiration, meanwhile, can be a form of projection, where the individual seeks validation from others to compensate for their own feelings of inadequacy. Several psychological studies support this link between trauma and narcissism. For instance, a study published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease found that childhood trauma, particularly emotional abuse, was strongly associated with narcissistic personality disorder in adulthood. Another study in the Journal of Clinical Psychology found that individuals with narcissistic personality disorder were more likely to have experienced childhood trauma than those without the disorder. These studies, along with numerous others, highlight the intricate ways in which trauma and narcissism can intertwine. They show how trauma survivors may develop narcissistic traits as a way to cope with their distressing experiences. However, it's important to note that not all individuals who experience trauma will develop narcissistic traits. Trauma responses can vary widely from person to person depending on various factors such as the individual's resilience, support systems, and personal coping strategies. In conclusion, as we've seen, trauma can create a complex web of psychological responses, potentially leading to narcissism. While the link may not be immediately obvious, understanding it can provide valuable insights into the human psyche and the long-lasting impacts of trauma. In understanding the link between trauma and narcissism, we can foster empathy and offer support. As we've traversed this journey from understanding trauma, unveiling narcissism, and exploring their complex connection, we've uncovered some critical insights. It's essential to remember that trauma is not a one-size-fits-all experience. It's a deeply personal journey that varies significantly from person to person. The traumatic events that one person may endure could lead to a plethora of psychological responses, one of which is the potential development of narcissistic tendencies. Narcissism, on the other hand, is not just about self-obsession or vanity. It's a more intricate and multifaceted personality trait. It's a defensive mechanism, a fortress built to protect the fragile self-esteem that lies beneath the surface. The narcissist's grandiose sense of self-importance, constant need for admiration, and lack of empathy are all part of this defensive armor. This brings us to the crux of our discussion: the link between trauma and narcissism. Trauma, especially when experienced during the formative years, can lead to a distorted sense of self and others. The world becomes a battlefield and the self becomes the only reliable ally. In this context, narcissism is not an act of arrogance but a survival strategy. It's a shield, a suit of armor, protecting the individual from further emotional harm. But remember, this isn't about labeling or stigmatizing people dealing with these issues. Instead, it's about fostering empathy and offering support. Understanding why someone behaves the way they do can help us respond to them more effectively and compassionately. It's not about excusing negative behavior but rather understanding the root causes and helping guide them towards healthier coping mechanisms. In conclusion, it's crucial to remember that trauma and narcissism are not standalone concepts. They are intricately linked and often feed off each other. Understanding this connection can help us approach individuals dealing with these issues with more empathy and less judgment. So, as we wrap up, let's remember that everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. Let's strive to foster understanding and empathy. Let's remember that the first step in helping someone is not to judge them but to understand them. Remember, understanding is the first step to compassion and change.